All right, so the concept behind all the programs, again, is to have a layer structure that corresponds with materiality in some way, shape, or form. So in SketchUp, we see this with the AutoCAD layers. We also see it in AutoCAD with the layer assignments. In Revit, it's based on the material name itself, but they all act somewhat similar. So in the next set, we're going to go through all three modeling platforms and bring them into 3ds Max. When I look at the 3D toolbar under SCB, I can click on the first button, and I'm going to bring up my 3D modeling layers. And if I look in the layer menu now, I have all of my modeling layers loaded into my properties, or into my drawing scene. The key behind all of this, at least in AutoCAD and Revit, or I mean SketchUp, is that the translation happens based on this color. So every object has a specific, or every material has a specific ACI color associated with it, or will in effect. You can do it without this, but it makes the facilitation of multiple models very difficult. Because essentially what you set up is a way to have a material set. Imagine a paintbrush with all the paints you want, and all you have to do is throw that ball of paint at the canvas, and you can make 25 of the same type of painting, right? Because I have these paints. Same thing with this. It doesn't matter what the name of the layer is, as long as the color is one of these ACI colors in AutoCAD. And if I go ahead and go File, Open, I'm going to go to the O drive again, under Training, and I'm going to go to 3ds Max, Level 1, Tutorial Files, and it's going to be the not AutoCAD workflow, it's going to be the workflow concept. You have concept DWG. I'm going to click on Open, and it's going to give you this read-only. That's because we're all accessing it at the same time. Ignore the material library because we don't do materials in here. Now to rotate, right, we're not modeling, so just to rotate this around, it's Shift and middle mouse button on the keyboard. Right, so I have a series of objects in AutoCAD, all that have a specific layer assigned to them. Right, so these are on 01, these are on 02, 03, 04, this is 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, so on and so forth. Those numbers now correspond with a specific material assignment. And if I go to the computer, the O drive, back to the training folder, 3ds Max, Level 1, Tutorial Files, and under that workflow concept, or excuse me, under the AutoCAD workflow, is the master document set. So you can read the other stuff for on your own, but this is what we care about. So each one of those ACI numbers corresponds with either a brick or a precast or a wood grain or a paint or a color of paint, whether or not it's the site element or it's a glass layer. Really, you should try and get all your glass on the same layers that we see here, your bricks, because eventually you're moving back to automatic material assignment for you guys. Right now it exists, but it's with standard materials, it's not with V-Ray materials. This will allow you to get more fluid in the way we do renderings. Right now when we do it, they just come in gray. We do have one that does a standard material, right? But each one of them does correspond with it. So if I had 10 different bricks in my scene, I would use obviously all these numbers, and then I would have to go to another brick layer. Now to bring in a file, again, all this stuff too, so if I go under, I'm just going to leave this training folder open. Including the video after you'll have today is also a detailed explanation of how we're going to do the link procedure for both AutoCAD. There's a SketchUp document in the SketchUp folder. There's a Revit document in the Revit folder. It pretty much explains it step by step on what you need to do. I click on close for that. All right, so I'm going to bring in that concept model. So to do so, there's two ways I can access the File Link Manager. I can go through the M on the keyboard, I can go to References, I can go to File Link Manager. I can bring it in that way, or 4 buttons over from the bottom left one is a candy wrapper looking object. I click on that. It also brings up the same window. It's a little bit faster, less clicks. All right, I'm going to toggle to my workflow concept folder. So hopefully you're on a system that used this before. It remembers the history. You should be able to see ODrive workflow concept somewhere in the history. Click on concept, click on open. Then I have to always remember to load in a preset. So the preset is going to be SCB one object capped. What that does is it brings in this entire model as one piece. And I'm going to click attach file, and it goes really quick. And then I have my AutoCAD drawing inside 3ds Max. And I can rotate my camera view forever what I want. But you'll notice when I select it now, because I selected one object capped, my pieces are no longer singular elements. Okay, so when I look at my objects here, I can't access individual properties, and that's because we're welding it together. You imagine a building that has, 10,000 mullions on it. If we brought in each individual mullion as its own piece, and you're trying to hurry up and get a thing done, right, chances are you're going to end up moving some stuff around on accident, right? And then you're going to have to go back and fix that stuff. So we weld everything together as one object. We have the building. We worry about moving things in another program. 3ds Max, primarily rendering. That same edit poly function I used when I made that small little terrain map when we were going through the interface is an edit poly, and that's in the transform window, or a transform toolbar. If I click on that, it turns my object into an edit poly, editable poly, and you'll see 5 red buttons in that menu. And remember, those correspond with accessing the vertex points of objects, so I can manipulate my CAD model even farther if I wanted to in 3ds Max. I could edit the edges of my AutoCAD model in 3ds Max. I can select the border. You'll need to actually have a full border selected. I can make my objects taller in 3ds Max if I wanted to. Or I can access the full object property itself. Now, where we're running the ACI color numbers and how those correspond now is that if you scroll, so how I scroll in the modifier is I just click on an empty space, and I should see the hand tool come up, and I click on the left mouse button, and I can scroll through what's over there. Or if you're like me and I get tired of scrolling, I can click and drag my modifier window over, and then I see everything that I need. With that object selected, so I have the 5th element object type selected, I see under Polygon Material IDs a number of 10. So that corresponds, and when I select objects, that one goes to 11. This one is number 2. This one is number 1. So that object ID is what is telling 3ds Max that it's going to have a material container containing that number. And AutoCAD is what defines that number set. Right? So this one's 22, so on and so forth. So every ACI color number now is inside 3ds Max with this number associating to an object. Now when I render though, I still don't have any materials on my objects. That means nothing. I have a nice white model, that's great. What I need to do is I need to now think about how to make a material container out of this. Right, so if I hit M on the keyboard, it brings up my material editor. And I'm going to select the second editor slot. I'm going to select the second material editor slot, and then there's an eyedropper to pull materials from objects. So I click on the eyedropper. Right now I have no material assigned to it. So really it's just picking up the whatever color the object is, right? So in this case the color is black and white. If I made it red, all my objects go to red. I'm still not able to pick that material because it's not a material, it's the object itself. What I need to do is apply the scripts that assemble all this and make it ready, render ready. So in the materials toolbar, which is here, the fourth button over will say Run MSO Routines for AutoCAD and Revit. I click on that button. It's going to open up this dialog box. And whenever I'm using AutoCAD or SketchUp models, I'm going to be using this set. If I'm using Revit models, I'm going to be using this set. For right now, to demonstrate concept, I'm going to click on AutoCAD Standard. So the standard's going to actually do the pre-material set for me. And I'm going to click on the word Apply with my AutoCAD model selected. And it's going to take a minute to chug through. And you'll see your object should change. And then if I use the eyedropper on my objects, it creates a material container for me. So now I can take this material container, and we're going to demonstrate this when we do the AutoCAD model. I can take this material set and just drag and drop on multiple building iterations. As long as the materials don't change and the layers don't change, I can reuse this on 20 different buildings, right? And in the time it takes one person to set up materials, we've already done it for you. The last part of this is we set up our materials because you got to size the thing. So everybody's worked in SketchUp before, right? Right, I got to size textures in SketchUp, right? So in 3ds Max, we predefine some materials for you, and we model all of our materials based on a 12-foot by 12-foot by 12-foot cube. So to apply that 12-foot by 12-foot by 12-foot cube to the objects here is I go down to the UVW mapping section of the same dialog, and for AutoCAD models or SketchUp models, I click on AutoCAD and I click Apply. So that's the last part. And you'll see it puts on the UVW modifier to my object at 12-foot by 12-foot by 12-foot. Okay. So after I have that applied and I click Render on my objects, now I have 50 materials applied to my object. I even have my brick already assigned on my cubes here. They're sized correctly and proportionately. I'd have soldier bricks, running courses, so on and so forth. We'll get into changing materials, doing advanced materials, changing colors. We'll do all those things tomorrow. This is just the concept of how we're managing models. And